So think about a student you might know. Maybe they're really bright. Right. But it's also clear they're struggling maybe with something specific that makes school, well, a real battle every day. Yet when their family goes looking for special education support, like an individualized education program, an IEP, they just get hit with a no.
Right.
And the reason their grades are okay, maybe even good, test scores look fine. This isn't some rare thing. It's kind of a silent rule happening in a lot of our schools.
It really is.
Today in this deep dive, we're going to explore exactly that. How schools often end up, rationing crucial special education services, especially IEPs. We'll look at how the language in the law itself, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA.
That specific phrase.
Exactly, that phrase, adverse effect on educational performance. How it's become less about protecting students and maybe more like a shield for the system.
It's a really critical issue and honestly pretty misunderstood. We often assume, you get a medical diagnosis, that should automatically open the door to school support.
Yeah, seems logical.
But that's precisely where the problem starts. That diagnosis, no matter how clear-cut, just doesn't guarantee an IEP. Understanding that gap is, it's central to everything we're talking about today.
Okay, so let's dig into that core misunderstanding then. This idea that, a medical diagnosis like autism or ADHD should just automatically get you an IEP in school. It feels right, doesn't it?
It really does feel intuitive. But what's striking is how long this distinction has actually been, pretty clear. Yet the confusion hangs on.
Right.
I mean, way back in 1992, the American Academy of Pediatrics was saying, look, the diagnosis alone isn't the golden ticket.
1992, wow.
Yeah. They said schools still have to figure out if the condition actually affects educational performance in a negative way, and if the child needs special education because of it. And, here we are decades later, 2021 even, and guidance for families is still repeating that same message.
It's kind of gobsmacking, really, that such a basic misunderstanding persists for so long. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it boils down to, let's call them different dialects of disability. Clinicians, doctors, they use systems like the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the ICD. They focus on identifying the condition, the diagnosis itself.
Okay, the medical side.
Right. But schools, they operate under IDEA, and IDEA speaks a different language. Eligibility isn't just about having the diagnosis. It's about the educational consequence.
The impact on schoolwork.
Precisely. So a child can absolutely meet every single clinical marker for, say, autism. But there's somehow managing to pass their classes, maybe through sheer effort or parental support.
Then the school can say.
The school can, and often does say, there's no demonstrated adverse effect on their educational performance. So no IEP needed, according to their rules.
Even if the effort is immense.
Even if it's unsustainable. And the crucial point here is that the final decision, it rests squarely with the school's IEP team. That's usually teachers, administrators, maybe a school psychologist.
Not the doctor who made the diagnosis.
Nope. Their job isn't to confirm the medical diagnosis, but to decide if that diagnosis impairs learning in a way that demands specialized instruction or services. And this is key. It means the same child, same diagnosis, could actually be found eligible in one school district.
And ineligible in the next town over.
Exactly. It really depends on how that specific district interprets the rules, what resources they have, their local policies. Research from 2018 really highlighted this variability.
So you end up with this, arbitrary gap. A family has this official diagnosis, they bring it to the school, and it just seems to evaporate. Poof. The need is clear, but the school gate stays closed.
That's a good way to put it. The diagnosis names the need, but eligibility becomes the gatekeeper.
So if IDEA's language, that adverse effect bit, is the shield, then grades and test scores, they're definitely the armor plating on that shield. This is where the rationing really kicks in, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The logic they use is, it's simple, maybe even a bit cruel. If the work's getting done, if the grades look okay,
then no harm, no foul.
Essentially. It completely ignores the invisible struggle. Right? The sleepless nights you mentioned, the sensory overload, the sheer exhaustion, just to look like you're keeping up.
And it feels like this gets worse when resources are tight, like teacher shortages.
Definitely. With special educator shortages leading to really high caseloads, this performance filter becomes an easy out. It's a convenient way to manage demand when the system feels overwhelmed. If the grades are good, it lets them off the hook, so to speak.
Is there research showing this rationing is kind of baked into the system?
Yeah, there is. Research really shows how eligibility decisions get shaped by these factors. For example, a 2013 study looked at autistic children. It found that while most do eventually get IEPs, who gets them isn't always about how severe the autism is.
So what is it about then?
This often links back to things like how educated the parents are, their ability to advocate, and even perceptions of how well services are coordinated. It seriously makes you ask, is eligibility really about the child's needs, or is it sometimes more about the system's capacity and the family's resources?
That's a heavy question.
And it gets more complex. Think about how disability categories themselves aren't fixed. Research from back in 2006 showed how kids who might have once been labeled with, say, emotional disturbance might now be classified as autistic.
How would that change?
It often reflects shifts in institutional thinking, policy changes, funding streams, maybe even diagnostic trends, rather than a fundamental change in the kids themselves. The labels flex with the system.
Wow.
And you see big differences based on context, too. A 2022 study compared Puerto Rico and the U.S. mainland. Same diagnoses, but different eligibility outcomes because of cultural views, policies, available labor, resources. It just hammered home that eligibility isn't purely objective. It's context-dependent, political even.
So, okay, putting it all together, good performance, good grades, they become this proxy, not really a measure of whether a child is learning well or coping, but more like a signal of whether the system can afford to recognize their struggle.
Precisely. The IEP gets denied, not because the disability isn't real, but because the grades provide cover. They allow the system to look away without immediate visible consequences.
And this shield, this armor of grades, it doesn't protect everyone equally, does it? It seems like who gets past that eligibility gate often depends on more than just their report card. Things like race, ethnicity, class play a role.
They absolutely do. The disparities can be pretty stark. There was a 2012 study that found Hispanic children were significantly underrepresented in autism eligibility. We're talking 95% of U.S. states.
Underrepresented, so fewer diagnoses.
Not necessarily fewer diagnoses overall, but fewer getting the autism eligibility for an IEP. Often they might get misclassified under different labels, maybe developmental delay or speech and language impairment.
Does the label matter that much?
It can matter hugely. While those labels might provide some support, they might not trigger the specific targeted services an autistic child actually needs. So it's access, but maybe not the right access.
And what causes that misclassification or under-eligibility?
Well, more recent research, like from 2023, points to systemic issues. It could be the evaluation methods used, cultural biases creeping in, school policies, lack of bilingual evaluators. It's a whole mix of factors. It reinforces that it's not just about the diagnosis, it's how the school system interprets and acts on it.
And you mentioned parental education earlier. That plays in here too.
Definitely. That 2013 study highlighted it, and it's a recurring theme. Families with more education, often more socioeconomic resources, just tend to have more what sociologists call cultural capital. They know how to navigate the bureaucracy better.
They know the buzzwords, the procedures.
Exactly. They might know how to document everything, who to appeal to, maybe even afford legal help if needed. They can push back more effectively when they get that initial no. For families without those advantages, it's a much steeper climb.
So it creates this uneven playing field. Same kids, same diagnosis, but in a wealthier, more educated community, they might get the IEP, while in another community, the door stays shut.
That's the reality. It quietly undermines ideas' promise of equal access. The shield works differently depending on who's trying to get past it.
Okay, but let's say a family does get through. They fight the fight, they navigate the system, and boom, eligibility granted. Victory, right. But what happens next? Is the IEP always what it's cracked up to be?
That's the next hurdle. Getting eligibility can feel like this monumental win, and it is, in a way. But when you actually look inside many of these IEPs, well, the victory can feel disappointingly thin.
What do you mean thin, like not enough services?
It can be that, but often it's more about the quality and specificity of the plan. Research from 2010 looks specifically at IEPs for young autistic kids. What they found was pretty concerning.
Like what?
Often the goals weren't clearly defined. They were vague, or the services listed weren't really specific or actionable. It might meet the basic legal checkboxes, but as one researcher put it, it was like having a map with blurred landmarks.
So a plan on paper, but not really a useful guide.
Exactly. It doesn't reliably guide teachers on what to do or how to measure progress effectively.
And is this just an issue for younger kids?
No, it seems to persist. Another study, this one from 2018, looked at elementary-level IEPs for autistic students. It found many just didn't line up with what we know are best practices for supporting these kids.
Meaning?
Well, things like lacking really measurable objectives or not clearly connecting the listed services to evidence-based strategies known to work for autism. The link between the plan and actual effective support was often weak.
So it's like there's another shield. First, you have to get past the eligibility shield, and then you might hit the shield of what? Compliance without real substance.
That's a really good way to describe it. Compliance without care, perhaps. The system checks the box. Yes, IEP provided, fulfilling its legal duty on paper. But the student's actual nuanced needs, they might still be largely unmet. Access is granted, but meaningful support can still be elusive.
Which brings us to the people trying to navigate all this. Behind every IEP meeting, wrestling with these vague documents, fighting for eligibility, there's this huge, often unseen effort being put in by parents and caregivers.
Oh, absolutely. They become this hidden labor force, really. Forced to become experts in law, bureaucracy, negotiation. It's a system that often feels, frankly, designed to be intimidating and push people away.
You hear stories about parents feeling overwhelmed, confused.
Definitely. Research, going back to 2008, documented this really well. Parents described feeling confused, excluded, talked down to in meetings. The room is full of professionals using jargon, acronyms.
Alphabet soup.
Right. Procedural talk dominates, and the parents, who know their child best, can end up feeling like passive bystanders rather than true partners. It's incredibly disempowering.
But it doesn't have to be that way, does it?
No, absolutely not. And research shows the difference. A study from 2014 found, not surprisingly, that parents report much higher satisfaction when they feel genuinely included. When educators actually listen, show they understand the disability, and collaborate.
Trust gets built.
Exactly. Trust is built, and outcomes tend to be better. But when professionals dismiss concerns or seem to withhold information or just stick rigidly to the official line, families leave feeling alienated, frustrated, and just plain exhausted.
And this burden on parents, it feels like it's not just an unfortunate side effect. It almost seems like part of how the system functions, how it manages demand.
That's a critical insight. By making the process so demanding, so reliant on parental advocacy and persistence, the system effectively rations services without having to issue a blanket denial.
So the parents who have the time, the energy, the resources to keep pushing might eventually get somewhere.
They might win concessions, yes. While those who can't sustain that fight, maybe due to work constraints, language barriers, or just sheer burnout, often fall behind. The shield holds, and the parents, not the institution, absorb the cost, emotional, practical, financial, of trying to push through it.
So this shield we keep talking about, it isn't made of concrete. It seems more elastic. It stretches, it contracts, depending on shifts in laws, policies, even how things get interpreted day to day.
That's a perfect way to put it, elastic. Eligibility isn't just about the child standing in front of them. It's shaped by these external forces, these frameworks that are constantly shifting.
Like what kind of forces?
Well, think about the diagnostic criteria themselves. The DSM, for instance, gets updated. Those evolving definitions directly impact who even gets considered for eligibility. A child might meet the criteria under DSM-4, but not DSM-5, or vice versa.
So the medical goalposts shift, and that affects school eligibility.
Precisely. The medical definition changes, and that ripples straight into the schools.
What else makes it elastic?
The legal landscape is huge. Court decisions, interpreting IDEA, new regulations, or guidance from the Department of Education. These can all cause schools to tighten up their interpretations. A 2015 analysis really dug into this.
Tighten up how?
Often, they become more cautious, more focused on minimizing legal risk. So they might become stricter about what constitutes an adverse effect to ensure they're compliant, legally speaking.
Which, ironically, could mean less access for kids who need it.
Paradoxically, yes. Compliance aimed at protecting the institution can sometimes end up further restricting access for the student's idea was meant to serve.
Yeah.
It really makes you question who the compliance is ultimately benefiting.
And didn't you mention earlier that things vary a lot state by state?
Hugely. A 2010 study basically laid out how inconsistent special education eligibility criteria are across the country.
Yeah.
The rules in one state can be significantly different from the rules next door.
So a child could literally move across a state line and suddenly become ineligible or eligible.
Absolutely. Their access to support could depend entirely on their zip code, not just their needs.
So this elasticity, this constant shifting, it just creates massive instability for families, right? Eligibility never feels secure, never like a guaranteed right. It's more like this constantly moving boundary line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A line drawn by forces legal, political, financial as it'll, often far removed from the child's actual day-to-day experience in the classroom.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. The main point we've explored today seems to be this. That key phrase in IDEA, adverse effect on educational performance. It was intended as a safeguard, right? To make sure kids whose learning was genuinely hurt by a disability got help.
That was the intent, yes.
But in the real world, in practice, it's morphed into something else. It's become this shield, a shield that often protects the system, its resources, its capacity, more than it protects the student. Schools can use it, often by pointing to good grades or test scores, to essentially ration access, to say no, even when a child has a clear diagnosis and is visibly struggling beneath the surface, leaving so many kids carrying these complex needs invisibly.
And I think the absolutely essential first step in changing this is just naming it. Recognizing this isn't just a neutral, objective application of the law, it's often functioning as a mechanism of institutional protection, a way to manage demand.
Seeing it for what it is.
Exactly. Understanding that dynamic is power. And that knowledge, that power, needs to be shared with parents, educators, policymakers, if we're actually going to dismantle these barriers.
So maybe the thought we leave you, the listener, with is this. What does it really truly mean to support every student, especially when their biggest challenges aren't showing up neatly on a report card? When the system itself seems almost designed to overlook that invisible effort we talked about.
Yeah.
Think about the full human cost for the child, for the family, when a system ends up prioritizing its own comfort, its own resource management over a child's profound, even if hidden, needs.